Hi, my name is Jessica Wisher-Hale, and I'm the coordinator for the OCMBOCE Center for Innovative Science Education. In this video, we are going to review the draft New York State Science Learning Standards to hopefully help you facilitate some discussions. The goals for this video are to share information regarding the draft New York State Science Learning Standards, to provide a shared understanding to facilitate collegial discussions, and to begin our process of transitioning to the New York State Science Learning Standards. The draft standards were released on November 19th. This process to develop the New York State Science Learning Standards began in 2013 with a survey that compared the next generation science standards to our current science standards. The feedback received from this survey was used by the preliminary draft standards writing team early summer of 2015 to make the first round of edits to the NGSS to make them specific to New York State. New York State put a call out in June of 2015 to hopefully get a group of standards writing team together over the summer. The state budget for approval, I should say, for that specific team did not get passed in time for the summer. So the preliminary draft standards writing team was made up of people that were already on contract from the Education's assessment office at the state level. So the first team was made of people that were already on contract from state ed. They were primarily people that work on writing assessments such as the Regents assessments or the 4th and 8th grade science assessments. So that first team made some edits. The edits to the NGSS to develop the New York State Science Learning Standards was then put forth in front of the Science Education Steering Committee. The Science Education Steering Committee is made up of a group of teachers, administrators, science educators from higher education, and people from industry. They reviewed the first round of edits and gave feedback to State Ed. State Ed then incorporated some, all were not sure exactly, of the Science Education Steering Committee's comments. Then a second round of edits were made by the Science Standards Writing Team. This team was derived from the call for people to volunteer that was put out in June 2015. There was upwards of 300 to 400 people that put forth an application to be part of this team. New York State was really interested in getting people from all regions of the state to participate on this second standards writing team. So these standards writing team included teachers from all across New York State. Let's go to the creation of the next generation science standards to begin with, since this formed the basis of our New York State Science Learning Standards. Before the NGSS was created, actually a framework for science education was written. The NRC produced this document in 2011. This document sets out the big context and goals for science education moving forward. It was written by approximately 18 individuals, which included experts in each of the science disciplines, including 2 Nobel laureates. It included people who are highly regarded science education researchers, cognitive scientists, and policy experts. There were also teams that represented each of the science disciplines. The goal was to set out this big picture, what ought the next set of science standards do, and what pieces of the most current research and how students learn science the best ought we include to have these new standards. This is the general process for the creation of the next generation science standards. The work began in the summer of 2011 with 26 lead states. This was a state-led effort. New York State was one of the 26 lead states that got on board to say we ought to write some new science standards. So the writing began in 2011 of the actual standards. You will notice on here that they have several groups that have commented on the NGSS. Some critical state stakeholders here, and they also have had several rounds of public comment on these standards. So the next generation science standards took over 2 years to develop, and they included several rounds of comments, including nationwide public comment. So now let's jump to the next, from the next generation standards to the New York Science Learning Standards. The NGSS is organized in 2 fashions, by disciplinary core idea and by topical arrangement. New York State has adopted the topical arrangement. Basically what that means is there's some areas in where you will see a mixture of, for example, life science standards and physical science standards. New York State added 14 new performance expectations in the kindergarten through high school range. The NGSS did not include any pre-K standards. New York State has added 9 pre-K standards. Additionally, New York State has altered approximately 30 performance expectations. Later in this discussion, when you actually see the draft New York State Science Learning Standards, you will notice that New York State highlighted in yellow any of the new performance expectations that they included. But any of these 30 performance expectations that they altered, these were not clearly marked in the document that State Ed has put out. I will introduce you at the end of this presentation to a comparison document that we created that shows all of these 30 alterations that were made. They also made some changes to the disciplinary core ideas, and these they did mark in the middle box with parentheses. So you will see NYSED in places where they altered the DCI, but I have also noted changes to the DCI in the comparison document that I will show you. Some big generalizations about the changes that were made to the NGSS to create our New York State Science Learning Standards. There tends to be more changes in the middle and high school than in the K-5 range. Seems to be that Earth and space science has the least amount of changes. There's some changes that alter the PE significantly, meaning the New York State performance expectation is significantly different from that performance expectation as written in the next generation science standards. There are other changes that are more wordsmithing or very slight changes. There was no noted changes that I could find in the science and engineering practices or the cross-cutting concepts. The three-dimensionality of the NGSS still remains. By and large, the context of the NGSS still remain in our New York State standards. What this means for us, very big picture in science education in New York State, is that this will require a significant shift in our K-12 science education. Why do we even need new standards? Well, it's been over 2 decades since we've had the last national standards, and our current New York standards are from about 1996. We know that science permeates a vast aspects of our world. In the last several decades, this permeation of science in our everyday world has even increased significantly. So students need to fundamentally understand core phenomenon to make decisions in their future. We need a set of standards that is preparing students for their future, not for our past. We also know that students not only need to understand phenomenon, they need to have cognitive abilities related to science to evaluate, use, and continue to learn science. We also, in the last 2 decades, have had a tremendous amount of learning in research that helps us better understand how students learn science. We, for our previous standards and much of our previous experience in research and science education, we underestimated students' abilities to learn science. We now know that students are able, even at a very young age, to engage in pretty significant science reasoning and rationalization through scientific data. We also need to confront the brutal facts. Why is our present science education not supporting students in their futures? So, we're going to take a minute to introduce you to the framework. So I'm going to ask you to pause for a moment. This video to open up another video that will discuss with you the premise for the framework for science education. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed watching that video, and now we will move on in our discussion. Key aspects of the framework. The framework set out that the goal of the next standards were to be science for all students, and they really mean all students. We had been living in the post-Sputnik era for quite some time, and our previous science standards had a tone of wanting to create more scientists and engineers. And this set of science standards, its goal is to educate all students to be engaged citizens that can make scientific reasoning part of their future. The framework is based on a learning progressions. It means that over time, students need to be given opportunities to further refine, deepen, and improve and increase in their accuracy, their understanding of different scientific phenomenon and concepts. So it's a learning over time. The framework is asking for coherent and cohesive K-12 learning experiences. So thus, it should be focused on a core set of ideas. In the framework, they set out 3 of them: cross-cutting concepts, disciplinary core ideas, and scientific and engineering practices. These are big ideas. They are not focused on, discrete facts. Instruction should be focused on understanding phenomenon, not focused on typical topics. The NGSS require a much deeper understanding of the phenomenon as opposed to the memorization of vocabulary alone. So as I mentioned, there's 3 dimensions to the standards. Each of these we should have a whole video on. So I'm going to kind of go through these quickly. I would like to let you know that I have written a blog on each of these that you can find on our science webpage. So let me just introduce you for a minute here. If you go to our main Science Center webpage, you can go over to the blog to read the blogs that we write monthly from the Science Center. And you can see that we have various ones, and as you scroll down, we eventually have ones on each of the 3 focused areas of the framework. Okay, back to the presentation. All of these have to be integrated completely. This is one of the key fundamental shifts of these new standards, is the 3-dimensionality of them. How to read the standards. When you look at these standards, they look very different from our current standards. I'm going to give you a quick rundown of how to read these. Up here at the top, you will see a numbering system. And up here at the top, these are the performance expectations. So this is what students need to be able to do at the end of cohesive learning related to these ideas on weather and climate. The first numbers or letters in this case indicate the grade level. So MS indicates middle school. Then the next set of letters in ESS, in this case, identifies Earth and Space Science. You could also see PS, which would indicate it's a physical science standard, and you could also see LS, which would indicate it's a life science standard. And then the 2 means it's the second standard in Earth and Space Science, and this is part 5 of this standard. And you will always notice bundling of performance expectations. Then you have the 3-dimensionality included in these bottom boxes. The scientific and engineering practices, the disciplinary core ideas, this is the content focus, and the cross-cutting concepts. These are big ideas in science that have always existed, but we've never made them explicit in our standards or to our students. So in this one, cause and effect. There are cause and effect relationships in all disciplines of science. There are things related to stability and change in all of our areas of science. More about each of these at some point in the future. New York State recently released a survey to collect feedback on these draft standards. They will be open until February 5th. It's a criteria reference survey. So when you open it up, you're going to see that for each question, there's a specific criteria that they're asking you to evaluate the standards to. So it's a very focused survey on the standards. There's about 43 questions organized into 4 different areas. The organization of the standards. So they're asking about the usability of just the organizational structure of the standards. There's questions or criteria rather related to coherence of the standards. What's the progression like K-12? They're also asking for feedback related to the clarity and the specificity of the standards and also the content and rigor of the standards themselves. You will have to do one question at a time when you go through the survey, and it's going to ask you to rank it on a Likert scale ranging from 4. There's 4 different selections you can make rather. And then at the end, there's 2 other questions. One for general feedback, and there's another one for general comments about implementation. So, now we're going to start to review the draft New York State Science Learning Standards. Hopefully, right now, prepared, whoever's running this session will have for you copies of the draft standards, the comparison document that we created here at the Science Center, and I'd like you now to please spend 10 to 15 minutes reviewing the document. Okay? Do this individually. If you want to have some small turn and talks mixed into this, that's okay too, but really spend some time looking at this. Look for 4 things. Things you expected to see, unexpected things, concerns, things you are excited about. Go ahead and take the time to review this now. Okay, now that you have dug a little bit into the draft New York State Science Learning Standards, let's bring ourselves together in groups of 3 or 4 to kind of chart our answers to these questions or our thoughts related to these questions, because there's no right answer to these questions. They're just questions to hopefully spur collegial discussion. So hopefully you have chart paper in front of you, and you can divide this chart paper into quadrants. In one quadrant, working in your groups, chart your ideas for how will these standards change the K-12 science learning opportunities. Try to include some evidence. So what do you think specifically made you see this change that will occur? Another quadrant for what instruction and system changes must occur to support these standards. Anything about these standards that concerns you, and anything about these standards that excites you. Go ahead and please work in groups to do that. Before we move on, you also hopefully are given some time to discuss what are the big takeaways here, kind of create your elevator speech to see what these standards are about. If somebody stops you on the street, I know who's going to stop you on the street to talk about science standards, or the next time you're out to dinner with friends, what's your elevator speech going to be about these draft New York State science standards? Go ahead and work in small groups to create that. Before we leave, I just want to introduce you to our website for a moment. So I'm going to go back. From our main Science Center webpage, if you click on this resources page for New York State Science Learning Standards, we have a variety of, I need to log back in here. Sorry about that. So you'll see we have a variety of resources here. We have the standards right here on our webpage if you'd like to see them. We have the survey. This is the link here for the comparison document that you have a hard copy of. We are hosting some other review sessions that you can come to. Here's some resources related to the next generation science standards, including the next generation standards themselves. We have some resources related to the framework, the NRC through the National Academies Press Each person can individually download and read for themselves a copy of the framework. I suggest it. It's a great document to help us better understand the standards. I have some other resources that are available that are research based. This Taking Science to School is a culmination of the most current research in how kids K-8 learn science, and that was one of the documents that is referenced a lot in the framework. We will continue to build and add to this page in the future to hopefully make it be a one-stop shop for all resources related to these exciting new standards that we have coming our way. So before you guys leave, I just want to say that we here at the Center for Innovative Science Education are here to support and help move science in the direction that these standards have. We are going to support you in this transition. If you have questions, email them to me, because perhaps that will be a good way for us to figure out if we should have other video series related to certain things. If you have any ideas for how we can better support you as we move forward to these new standards, we'd also like to hear those as well. So thank you for listening. I hope that you were able to engage in some discussion with your colleagues and to begin to dip your toe into the pool of these new standards. This is an exciting time for science education, and yes, big change is happening, but it's good change, and it's change that we are all capable of. So best of luck, and hope to talk to you soon. Bye.